Hello and welcome to my favorite course that I've ever made. It just so happens that it's the only course I've made yet, but I'm sure it will remain my favorite because I love talking about this. And that's trust or lack thereof of data in the world of education. And I think this is a very important topic that we don't talk enough about. We often talk about data literacy, we talk a lot about data visualization, but we don't talk a lot about the culture of using data within our schools. Um, and I mean, we do talk about it in terms of like it comes up, my teachers aren't using data. They won't use data. Every time I say data, they get mad at me. And the problem is that we're not diving deeper into that to determine what that lack of buy-in is stemming from. And so that's really what I want to dive into in this course. And it's going to encapsulate a lot of conversation around trust in the world of data and education, but it's also going to help you kind of lay out an action plan on how to use data in a way that doesn't ignore the fact that the culture behind it is so important. So we're going to start with our first chapter, and that's the foundation of trust in data. And we're going to dive all into the history of data and education, and we're going to talk about some of the barriers to using data in the world of education for teachers specifically. Each of the chapters that I have in this course are going to come with a video. Yeah, let's get started, I guess. So let's first talk about where the whole data thing started within education. So we kind of can trace it all the way back to the late 19th to early 20th century, and that's really when we have like John Dewey. We all know John Dewey. We start talking about using empirical evidence. We start talking about measuring the impact that we had on students, and that kind of brought about the standardized testing. And around that same time, we started to around like the 1950s, 1960s, not really the same time, but same time as in a long time ago. We had the launch of Sputnik, and that was by the Soviet Union. And, it wasn't the United States. And we have a problem with that because, we want to be bigger and better than every other country. So what are we going to do? We're going to acknowledge that we need more scientists. We need more people out there that are willing to dive into STEM. So what are we going to do? Throw money at it. And if we're throwing money at it, then we need to know, we need to hold these teachers accountable, because we're like, hey, we're giving you all this money. You better be doing something. So we're going to be looking at these teachers and we're going to be like, hey, what's that data say? And we're going to be paying attention to when it says good things, but we're also paying a lot more attention to when it says things that we don't really like. And what's this all stemming from? This is all stemming from tests. So we're throwing all these standardized tests at our students. We're making them fill in all of these bubbles. And and we're taking all of that data and accumulating it into some kind of picture of what our teachers are providing for our students. And I think we're starting to get to the point now where we're understanding that that's not really a valid picture of, not really at all, a valid picture of what our teachers are providing to our students, what our schools are providing to our students. Excuse me, pneumonia. Um, so, but back then, it was this big thing. We're throwing money at you. We need to know, are you doing your job? And when we see that, that the data is showing that they're not doing their jobs, put that in quotes, then it's bringing about some fear within our country's policymakers and everything else. So then we have in 2001 the No Child Left Behind Act. And of course, that meant that we were going to be testing all of our students in reading and math, and we're going to be looking at the data in all kinds of different ways, and we want to make sure, are you doing what you need to do? I'm going to take a quick break One of my goals for this course is to not talk so fast because I can't breathe. And it doesn't help that, again, I am just now recovering from pneumonia. I'm gonna take a quick break. I'll be right back. Anyway, we get to this point where we're looking at this data in all kinds of different ways, and we're seeing a lot of gaps. So we're pushing out this data to our teachers, and what kind of message does that send to our teachers? You're not doing enough. That's a message it's sending to our teachers, and maybe we're not saying it, but they know it. They can see it, and that's a message that keeps getting pushed out to our teachers through all of this data. And then what do we do with all of this data? We put it into report cards that measure how our schools are doing when it comes to our students' performance. And we're seeing these kind of messages. F. My picture's in the way, but this was not a great rating, whatever it was. I'll make sure I move my picture so that you guys can see it on your end. And we're taking all this data. We're coming up with these report cards that we're sending to schools. We're coming up with these lists, the best and worst school systems in 2023. And then COVID hits, not in 2023. COVID hit before 2023, in case you're wondering. 2020. I don't know if you know, but we weren't doing so great to begin with in education. We were stumbling along. There were a lot of things that needed to be fixed, and then COVID hits, and at the beginning of COVID, everyone's like, "Oh, we love you, teachers. Like, I can't imagine how you do this. I'm trying to homeschool my kids, and I only have 2 or 3 of them, and you have a class full of them. Like, I don't know how you do it. You're the best. You're the best." And then all the kids go back and like, "Oh, but you're to blame. This is your fault." Those gaps that were already big to begin with, they're like 3 times the size. And you're not fixing them fast enough. Surprise, we're seeing really low math and reading scores. Can't be due to COVID, and maybe a little bit due to COVID, but really, like, the teachers should have been masters of virtual learning before COVID hit. Why wouldn't they be? How did all of this happen? They weren't providing enough work for our students. They weren't doing enough during COVID. And they're still not doing enough now. So these are the messages that are being thrown at our teachers constantly. And yes, some of this, the trust in teachers dropping from 63%, which wasn't high to begin with, down to 57%. Some of this is due to political issues that we know are going on and all kinds of other things. But the thing is that data, whether it's coming in the form of a proficiency or our trust in teachers, this is consistently being pushed in front of our teachers. And the message that is that we're looking at that data, and the message that you're not doing enough. And that leaves our teachers looking like this. And they don't need another thing to make them look like this. They're dealing with a lot right now. I think we can all agree with that. Everyone in schools, everyone in education is dealing with a lot right now. So why do we want to see data if the data is showing us that we're not doing enough? Those highlights are becoming harder and harder to find. And everyone's becoming more and more stressed out by these enormous gaps in student success. And it's causing everyone to panic. And that panic means that we are typically not in the executive state. Love that brain science. And we're making decisions that do not recognize the stress and anxiety that we're all dealing with. So I think this is a very, very important part of the conversation about data and education. And like I said before, I think that it's so important that we don't leave out this context and all of these feelings that are are having an impact on the way that our teachers can sit down and talk about data. So I'm going to pause for a second, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit about additional barriers in data use. Okay, I took a quick break to cough and breathe. That's important, you know. So let's talk a little bit about the additional barriers that we run into when we're talking about using data in education. So one of the biggest barriers is that our teachers are not data literate. These are not, and I say that in a very like empathetic way. As educators, I don't know, did they add a course for data and education to college? It doesn't matter. When you're in the classroom, it's completely different. And you know, like we have all this data being thrown at us in all these different ways, and not many people are ready to be pulling apart all this data and reflecting on it. So there's the I don't know what this means and the I don't understand that then turns into the I don't trust. Because if I don't know it and if I don't understand it, then I'm probably not going to trust the fact that it's telling me the things that I need to hear. And in addition to that, you have, I don't like that picture. That was a poor choice. You have the fear of negative evaluations from your administrators. You have all the data coming in, and the administrator sitting down and looking at it, and chances are, you know, it's part of your evaluation. So there's this like, is it going to be used against me? Do I have someone watching me in a really creepy way with really creepy eyes? And are they using that data? Are they collecting that data to be used against me, essentially? And that's going to cause an additional fear or mistrust of that data. Glad to have that picture gone. There's also the lack of clear communication when it comes to data. And this is something that I jump into in one of these chapters, and that's all the technical jargon that is used. We don't need to be diving into this deep statistical analysis when it comes to this data. Yes, if you're making big decisions with multiple schools, multiple districts, policy changes, that kind of stuff, then you should really have someone who knows what they're talking about when it comes to that deep data diving. However, in schools, we don't need to spend all of our time looking at crazy correlations and all this other kind of stuff. One of my favorite questions that I get asked is there a correlation between attendance and grades? And first of all, grades is the worst data that you can look at. I despise looking at student grades unless you're using some kind of standard mastery grading, whatever. It means nothing. Everyone grades differently. Grades are the worst data that you could look at. Is there a correlation between attendance and grades? Yes. Okay. Yeah, there is. I can answer that question. We don't need to look at the data. But even that kind of stuff, like it's not going to take all of this crazy statistical training to dive into. Let's remember that, yes, data use is a priority within our buildings, but there are a million other things that are also priorities. So we're going to keep it pretty surface level and use it in a way that impacts our students, but in a way that we can actually sustain within our schools. Because let me tell you, we would not be able to sustain some kind of crazy statistical analysis for every single formative assessment that we're giving our students. That's not going to work out too well. And then there's data overload. And I am so guilty of this. When I first learned how to make a data dashboard, I just like wanted to throw in all of the cool different graphs and charts and you know, like all the drill downs and everything. And then I was like pushing out these dashboards to the staff and so excited about all of the different things that they can discover by looking at this data. The thing is that no one looked at that data because as soon as they opened it, they were like, whoa, sensory overload, I'm done. So, and I get it. It makes sense because if I weren't a total geek and loved all things spreadsheets, graphs, charts, and everything, then I probably would feel the same way. And so over the past several years, I've really tried to streamline and really just create some simplistic visuals that capture important data in ways that are super easy to read. Because at the end of the day, time. It all comes back to time. There's no time. We're not going to sit here and spend 30 minutes trying to figure out what this weird spider web visual captures. And I know that some platforms use the spider web, but even then, sometimes I have teachers that come to me and they're like, can you tell me what this means? Or like how to read it? Like, even if it's something that I know how to read, what can I gain by looking at it? What are the insights? And excuse me, the thing is, we want to make sure that those insights are very apparent and super easy to find. The next, we talked a little bit about this before, and that's that, there's a real mistrust that comes from not knowing where that data is coming from. And sometimes it feels like when you're working at school that there's all these data chart graphs that are just popping out of thin air. And you're like, where did this come from? A great example of this is actually walkthrough data. If you have walkthrough data and you've been through maybe like 20% of the classrooms in the building, that walkthrough data is irrelevant to every other teacher that is in that building. You might not think so, but but believe me, they believe so. Because if you're not coming into their classroom, if their data is not a part of that data that's been collected and being presented, why am I listening? This isn't my classroom. So you really have to be careful and be transparent about where data is coming from, how it was collected, and bringing in that how along with the why really helps with the buy-in. So it's not something that you can leave out, that's for sure. Side note, if you notice that my lighting has changed, it's because I've had to record a few times to learn a very valuable lesson, and that's that if you make videos that are too long on Canva, it will pretend like it's loading for like an hour and not do anything, and then it's all gone. So Canva's free for educators, but use it wisely. Anyway, so another barrier to all of this this data use in education excuse me, is that historically it's led to a lot of labeling kids. And educators are not a fan of this because educators know their students and they know that those students cannot be just like, you can't just stick a number on a kid or stick a label on a kid and expect that that's going to have going to give a clear picture of that student's strengths, weaknesses, their characteristics, all of the awesome things that teachers know about those students cannot be encapsulated in numeric data. So it's not something that we're comfortable with, which is why I put such a huge emphasis on bringing in not just that numerical data, but also that additional context that those teachers can provide and molding it together to be able to make some decisions that are actually relevant to those students rather than some decision that's made just based on pure numbers alone. Another barrier that we often run into is not having the tools or the dashboards that we need to be able to make these decisions. And this one comes with a story. So there was a time when I was working with my teachers and we had a data specialist come in to show us how to decipher the data that was being presented on the state test dashboard. And essentially what we wanted to be able to do is look at the item analysis and figure out what decisions can be made in terms of our instruction based on this data that we're looking at. And so the data specialist was in there and she's, talking all about how, you just have to get into this platform. It only takes like 500 clicks and a username and password that you probably have forgotten a million times. And then once you're there, you can then look by item and by student, but you got to do a lot of scrolling. There's like the typical vertical scrolling, and there's also some horizontal scrolling, and sometimes things don't match up. It's really weird. Like they're like not aligned properly. And then you have these categories, and And, there's not a real easy way to work this. So, of course, the teachers were like, is there a way that I can group it and see like which students mastered which standards or did well on which items, so I can kind of start to make some small groups, because we're really into the small group instruction. And she's like, yeah, sure, you can do that. So after you get to this platform, then you can come over here and you can download the CSV, which is basically a spreadsheet. My teachers are pretty good with spreadsheets. On the grand scheme of things, they're pretty spreadsheet literate because they work with me. And so you're going to download this spreadsheet, and then you're going to do some sorting, and you're going to do some conditional formatting. And then once you do that, you'll be able to group your students, and then they all just like look at me. Because while I do expect them to know how to work on spreadsheets, I don't want them to be wasting their time doing all of this for every single assessment, for every single one of their classes. So they look at me, I'm like, don't worry about that, I got you. And sure enough, I did. By the end of that day, I had this tool where they could just dump the spreadsheet into it, and it would group their put their students all in groups depending on which ones they mastered, and everything was great. But apparently she didn't like that. And she's like, no, you guys should want to do this. And you shouldn't be relying on someone on your staff, because there's not always going to be someone on your staff. And so, you should want to do this, and you should want to be able to look at the spreadsheet and do all this. She considered that like the analyzing the data. And here's the thing. Sorting spreadsheets is not analyzing and reflecting on data. That's doing tedious work to get to a point where then you can begin to analyze and reflect on that data. Those are two different steps. There's the background work, and then there's the analyzing and reflecting. So, which like the analyzing, I guess you can kind of consider that the background work, but you don't need to do that to be able to reflect. And they don't have the time to do that. So why wouldn't we be putting all these tools in front of them? And yes, I'm not going to be around. Actually, this is my last year with them. And then I'm going full-time consulting. But while I'm here, I might as well create as many tools as I can to make it easy for them. Because at the end of the day, they do know how to sort. And then most of them know conditional formatting too. But they don't need to be wasting their time doing that. That's not okay with me, and that's not okay with them either, which is why so many teachers are so tired of hearing about data use, because it also comes with all of this additional work that seems tedious. And it's pointless for us to keep pushing this when there are easier ways to do things. And then you're left with these teachers who are just overloaded, and they're shutting down. Because essentially when it comes to everything that they've been put through over the past several years especially, and everything that they continue to go through on a daily basis, what we are doing by ignoring these barriers is just causing them more stress, more anxiety, more fear, which is leading to more burnout. And we can't afford to lose teachers. We know what's happening out there right now, and it's important for us to not add to the list of things that are driving our teachers out of the world of education. So that's my plea to you, and the plea comes with the rest of this course, which I've talked a lot about the bad things that we're doing and the bad barriers and everything else, and now we get to kind of start moving into what are some steps that we can take to ensure that we are really integrating that trust into the data that the data practices that we are using within our schools. And so with every chapter, at the end of every chapter, we have a pause and reflect. You have a few questions down there at the bottom that I would love for you to answer within the comments. So in order to get your certificate, you will have to put a little comment down there. It doesn't necessarily have to be an answer to every single one of those questions. Just pick and choose, or talk about something entirely different, whatever you think is most important. But I want to hear from you, and I want to be able to create some kind of forum for people to discuss these things together. So have at it, and congrats on finishing the first chapter, to both you and me, because I had to record a few times. So yay! All right, see you next chapter.